everyone. The motion before the House this evening is this House believes that humanity's augmentation with technology creates a better world. I'd like to look to Michael Furtick to open the case for the proposition.
Madam President, I am a poor, simple American. I immediately feel myself to be overwhelmed, as I do not have the benefit of rhetorical flourish, experience in parliamentary debate, logic, or reason. I am deeply unprepared and humbled. Indeed, this is a rental tuxedo, which I have acquired through the sharing economy. And this is a clip-on tie, which is a terrific example of clip-on technology. Indeed, I feel myself to be a farmer among the great wits of England. Unlike the opposition, which has the benefit of rhetorical flourish and skill, I must rely on humbler benefits, such as the overwhelming strength of the facts, the depth of their ineluctable facticity, my own ethical rectitude, and the absolute moral integrity of our point of view. It is clear through the long train of evidence of the benefits, that the benefits of the marriage of technology and humanity are very powerful. Indeed, if you disagree, you must remove our clothing, our lighting, our heating, our air conditioning, my eyeglasses, computers, smartphones, periscope, vaccinations, which is its own form of special stupidity in Silicon Valley, the benefits of the food supply chain, heart valves, dialysis, and importantly, motorized wheelchairs and artificial vocalization systems. These two are so important because, no doubt, we know what our opposition will say. No doubt they will cite the great gods of Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking. They will tell us that we must be afraid of artificial intelligence, the dangers of a future dominated by artificial intelligence. They will try to frame the debate today as one about hypothetical robot domination. And knowing them in particular as people, they will likely speculate wildly about a future in which perfectly endowed, sex-crazed fembot dominatrices will seize control of our society and erotically abuse us from morning till night. But even while they dwell longingly on this future, they will accidentally elide the most important point. That if you insist, as they do, that technology is bad for us, the very act of citing Professor Hawking becomes an act of intellectual dishonesty and moral turpitude. Without a technology-human augmentation, we have no Stephen Hawking. We have no motorized wheelchairs. We have no voice interpretation. We have no intelligent debate about artificial intelligence. Our learned, fancy, sophisticated, tuxedo-owning opposition, apart from projecting their most vivid psychosexual fantasies upon us, are also, make no mistake, calling directly and explicitly for the assassination of our beloved, treasured, psychosexually fantasizing Stephen Hawking. I, for one, say for shame. Now, we can imagine, as a matter of heuristics, which is a word I definitely knew before today, the opposition may assert that at the limit, at the mathematical limit, technology can have its deficits. We must indeed be mindful of AI, as we must be mindful of all technology. But it is always, isn't it? It is always the combination of people and technology that solves the problems arising from the combination of people and technology. For without motorized wheelchairs, there is no physics, there is no intelligent discussion of artificial intelligence. These things go together. Freeman Dyson, once remarked that you can solve all of society's problems at once by killing all of the people. But unlike the fashionable, well-dressed, tuxedo-owning opposition, I prefer not to kill all of the people. I am an optimist, a simple American optimist. Thank you.
I thank the honourable guest for his speech and now look to Catherine Brooks to open the case for the opposition.
Surprised that female robot dominatrices do not appear in my speech. Maybe they should have done, but that definitely wasn't the debate that we were expecting on opposition. Nor were we expecting a debate in which we had to argue that we are against technology and against things which help people to live their lives, because that's not the motion that we're debating. The motion that we are debating is very specifically about technology that augments humanity. The augmentation, physical, intellectual, of what it means to be human, our human body and our human mind. So let's have the debate about that today. We're not talking about motorized wheelchairs. What we are talking about is future trends towards augmentation of both the physical body and the mind, and things like genetic selecting of embryos in order to perfect what it means to be human. Now, I welcome you here as one of the competitive debaters of the Union, and you may wonder, given that in the vast majority of my time I'm a doctoral student of 16th century international law, what I have to say about technology. You'd probably be right. Given that I've spent the vast majority of the last 2 years in a hole at the bottom of the Bodleian, it's frankly lucky I can work an iPhone at all. But this debate isn't just about technology, and though I'll concede the proposition clearly no more about that. But what we're talking about today is actually a debate about human nature and how human nature will interact with the technologies of the future and how these technologies will change what it means to be human and will change our understanding of our social world. The main thing we're going to bring you today is how we believe that these technologies will exacerbate existing inequalities in a way that is incredibly pernicious for all humanity, but particularly those who will not have access to these technologies, and that is the vast majority of the world. Because the technologies that we're talking about, and even the technologies the proposition are talking about, are only available to the minority. This isn't something that is going to be available on a mass scale. So the global inequality that we are currently witnessing spiraling, where so much of the world's wealth is concentrated in the hands of so few of its population, will spiral out of control. Why? Because if you have a situation where you are able to augment the physical body and the mind of a person, that clearly solidifies existing inequalities, where those who already have access to riches will be those who have access to these technologies. It locks out any potential of social mobility, where if you live in a world where you can augment your mind but have to pay for the privilege, this means that those who cannot pay for that privilege will never be able to have the same mental capabilities as those who can, and never able to access social mobility in the way that at least they can now. What we're talking about in the future with the technology that the proposition wants to defend is truly a world of the haves and the have-nots, in which the have-nots are denigrated and have no access to the elite's wealth and power. And why is inequality such a problem, and why in particular are these technologies something that we should really worry about? Firstly, because on a societal level, inequality is the cause of an enormous amount of social ills. Crime, poor health, mental illness, all enormously correlated with high levels of inequality on a global scale. And you map this across all different national contexts. Why does this happen? Because when you live in an unequal world, an unequal society, that erodes trust between people. You cannot identify or relate to someone who earns 1 million times what you earn in a year, who lives a life so totally and fundamentally different from yours, and has no understanding of what it means to be you. And this is why you get all the problems of massive amounts of crime and mistrust within these societies. Also it's a cause of anxiety and depression amongst people, because if you live in a world where you understand your position in a hierarchy of social inequality, you are consistently measuring yourself against others, and you never come up against, you never measure up to what you believe that you should. It also encourages excessive consumption, because again, if you're measuring yourself by what you're worth and what you earn, because that's what society tells you to do, this encourages you to consume and to demonstrate your wealth in order to feel validated as a person. For any individual living in this world, an enormously unequal world, you are consistently already measuring yourself against others. In a world where they're talking about of augmented humanity, where certain groups of people have access to technologies which fundamentally transform what it means to be human and fundamentally transform their ability to act within society, those people who do not have access to these technologies will feel all of the pressures of inequality, but exacerbated to a much greater scale. They will live in a world in which they can know they can never attain what the elite can attain. This is not a world that we, as the opposition, want to live in. I also want to talk a bit about technology as an intermediary in human communication and how that has been enormously problematic and why it will be more problematic within the future. So advances in technology have already meant that the vast majority of human communication now takes place via some sort of technological intermediary, be that emails, Facebook, whatever. And not only are people losing the skills of communication and socialization, not only are people now gaining information in a way that is incredibly shallow and unhelpful, which is why you get the clicktivist generation and slacktivism and, let's do something to stop Coney, not that anyone who knows who Joseph Coney actually is. But more importantly, it encourages people to present an idealized version of themselves. When you're no longer engaging in face-to-face communication, but instead presenting the perfect version of yourself on Facebook, where, by the way, this speech will not be included in my perfect idealized version of myself. That means that you are encouraged to think of humanity as constantly seeking perfection. To be human is to constantly strive for something that you can never attain. And that is incredibly problematic insofar as you will never attain that, and you will always devalue yourself and believe yourself to be less worthy. You're also comparing yourself against the idealized versions of other people, with every single person uploading photos of them having fun on Facebook while they're actually secretly in their bedroom crying, meaning that no one ever really understands what other people's experiences of life truly are. People are living in a false version of what it means to live, of what it means to be human. And all of the understanding that we have previously gained in society falls down. That's something that is going to get much worse as technology increases and as face-to-face communication depreciates enormously. There's also, let's face it, an enormous potential for misuse for these technologies in the future. We've already established that these are going to be in the hands of the few and not the many. And let's be clear that the elites in the vast majority of the world have very specific interests that do not include democracy, that do not include sharing of wealth and privilege. You are now providing a technological means through augmentation of humanity for the elite to be able to cement their power in a way that other people can never access. That's something that is going to be really problematic in the future and threatens our understanding of democracy. Lastly, as the only woman in the debate, I thought it might be useful to chat about what this world will look like for women, because technology has very different impacts upon men and women. And if we're talking about augmentation of humanity, that will be very different for men and for women. Because already women are encouraged to view themselves primarily through their looks, through their appearance, and through their validation through the male gaze. When already we see spiraling rates of plastic surgery, where women are told that you have an ideal you have to live up to. It's a very specific ideal, it's not a male ideal, it's one determined by men, but one in which you have to concentrate on how you look. And women are either forced to endure the costs, both physical and literal, of plastic surgery, or to say that they can't afford that, and as a result be judged against an unrealistic ideal. In a world in which you are saying we are augmenting humanity, that is a world in which this problem gets enormously worse, and one which current trends in feminism are totally unable to deal with. Fundamentally, the world that they are talking about is one prone to enormous misuse, but most importantly, will exacerbate inequalities in an incredibly pernicious way. And that means that the world will be worse for everyone, but particularly those who we should care most about. Very proud to oppose.
I thank the Honourable Member for her speech and now look to Phil Libin to continue the case for the proposition. We've had a swap.
Yes.
Ali Parser?
Yes.
There we go.
I'm so short that whether I stand or I sit, it hardly makes any difference. And as a little guy who grew up in one of the most dangerous, violent cities in the world, I learned to appreciate risk. So when the previous speaker talks about the existential risk of technology, I utterly agree. Let me actually go even a little bit further. The math is very simple. If computing capacity increases at the rates of Moore's law in the way it has, it'll be by 2040, somewhere around there, where computers will be as intelligent, supposedly, as human beings. By 2041, they'll be double as intelligent. By 2050, that means 1,000 times more intelligent. 2060, 1,000,000 times more intelligent. We will be the cockroaches upon which their intelligence will preside. I get that. I got it. But I also was born in the Middle East, where they say that if you want God to laugh, you give him your 5-year plan. I have no idea where this technology is going to take us and what the future is going to look like. I drive my staff, my employees crazy by always telling them that a human being shares 83% of his DNA with a cockroach. What makes the difference is those tiny little percentages. So the fact that people think we can project the way we're going so precisely to deliver such a gloomy picture of the future is well beyond and above my capability. But there is something that is not above my capability. I can see. While I can appreciate the future danger of technology, I can see the current, present risk to humanity that we are all grappling with. Look, I'm in healthcare. Let me tell you about healthcare. We live in one of the richest countries in the world, and yet 1 in 5 of us cannot get the appointment we need to see a simple doctor. 1 in 8 of us, once we see a doctor, we're misdiagnosed. Of those of us who are lucky enough to be diagnosed, 1,000 of us die a year, every year. That's 2 747s a year, a month, dropping off the skies. Die of simple, avoidable mistakes. If you have a mental health issue, to the point of the previous speaker, do you know what is our solution for you? If you're not the son or the daughter of a rich kid, we put you in jail. 70% of our jail inmates are people who had a simple mental health issue that we did not deal with. And yet, we are on the verge. And this, by the way, is in the National Health Service in Britain, one of the best healthcare systems in the world, in my view. 50% of the world population have almost no access to healthcare. You're absolutely right about the equality, and yet we are just on the verge of being able to solve healthcare almost for everyone, everywhere. And for those of you who think that's an imaginary solution, let me tell you, when I was growing up, if I wanted to buy music, I had to go from the capital to the capital of my country 9 months to a year after you had access to music to buy it, and then bring it back to my town and pirate it for my friends. And when I chose to go to university, I chose my university on the size of the library it had. Today, it doesn't matter if you're in Connecticut, Kabul, or Kenya. You have access as a child to all the knowledge of the world as long as you have access to Google, or you can download any music you wish. We're about to do that with healthcare. And I tell you why. 1, diagnostic is becoming almost free. 10 years ago only, it would have costed me $1 million to do a top-to-toe diagnostic. Today, I can do that with $10,000. 99% reduction in the cost of diagnostic. Far more importantly, it is now coming into my pocket. I saw the other day at Liverpool University a gadget I can connect to my mobile phone as I speak to it. Not only it can analyze my breath for 50 different diseases, and probably the curry I took yesterday too. If diagnostic is about to become free, we will be soon, by the way, like our cars, where we are constantly diagnosed and knows what is going wrong all the time. Secondly, information in healthcare is already free. Anybody with access to a computer can have all the humanities knowledge on medicine. But what is far more important, that knowledge has been doubling every 18 months. Do you know what that means? That means that what we know in medicine today, only 5 years ago, 2/3 of that we did not know. Which doctor, which human being can fit into their mind all of that knowledge? 17,000 papers on cancer alone last year. Without the use of artificial intelligence today, how can we find it? And it's true that if IBM is sending Watson to medical school, that kind of sounds like the showmanship of Kasparov playing chess against Big Blue. But remember, it took only 10 to 15 years for every child to have an almost free app in their pocket that plays chess. And there is no human being today who can beat a machine in chess. Thirdly, we now have, for the first time in human history, a network that is equally almost democratically distributed across the globe. Whether you're Bill Gates or you're a peasant in Tanzania or you're me, we all have almost the same access to mobile networks. And we all have one of these in our pockets. In fact, mine is an iPhone, which probably is better than what Bill Gates carries, because he's presumably is a Nokia. And these things are getting better and better every day. Whatever it does today is only 50% of what it does. Next year, it's only 1,000 of what it can do in 10 years' time. Imagine a mobile phone 1,000 times more powerful, what it can do, how it can help us bring healthcare to everyone. Listen, I worry about the future of technology, as you do. But I worry more about what is happening to humanity today. I know we can help it, we can save it. I came from the kind of poverty. I've seen the people that can be helped today. Ask yourself this. You can push it back, but ask yourself this. If not now, then when? If not us, then who? Thank you.
I'd like to thank the honourable guest for his speech, and now, hopefully this is the right way around, look to Jerome Ravetz to continue the case for the opposition.
Well, perhaps as a member of the opposition team, I should start with a statement, perhaps a sort of a loyalty oath, and that is, I am not a Luddite, and I have never been a Luddite, and I never shall be a Luddite. And I've always derived great personal inspiration from a book I read a long time ago by Norbert Wiener, who is the great prophet of this modern age. The book's title tells all about it. It's called The Human Use of Human Beings. And the fact is that thanks to the new technologies which are with us and which are still to be developed, it will at long last be possible to treat human beings as human in the work process and in politics. So that's where I start. Now, the reason I'm on that side and on this side, rather than this side, can be explained. Permit me here in Oxford to start with a distinction. We might distinguish between two styles of technological innovation. We might think of smart innovation on the one hand and what we might call sledgehammer innovation on the other. With the smart innovation, we try to solve problems. With the sledgehammer innovation, we don't need to solve them, we beat them to death. Now, a very good example of sledgehammer innovation is antibiotics. Now, up until fairly recently, it was believed that when you got sick, it was because of either God or the devil or the witches or your stars or something like that. Rather more than 100 years ago, science finally moved in and showed that when we get sick, it's because we have teeny little things we call germs or microbes that get inside us and do bad things. Then we discovered that we could actually identify them and kill them, and thereby prevent disease and cure disease and bring standards of health and happiness all over the world. So we actually had a sledgehammer solution to the problem of disease, which has worked brilliantly until very, very recently. But now we're discovering that we're not the only ones playing this game. The germs are also in the game, and they're really quite smart. And they've actually discovered something that we hadn't thought about, namely Charles Darwin and the origin of species and the improvement of species by natural selection. So what we were doing was actually breeding up more effective varieties of these bugs, which, as you may know, are now becoming more and more resistant to our wonderful drugs, and in fact are threatening to destroy modern medicine as we know it. These warnings about this are all in the press. There's a piece about it in today's Sunday Times. Now, why this is happening is from all sorts of causes. We are rather slack in our demands for antibiotics. Farmers find them all too profitable to use to make bigger and better beef and chickens. But in the last resort, it's all because we have assumed that we could beat the problem to death with a sledgehammer made of drugs. Now, sometimes when the technology comes in with a sledgehammer, it's not quite so deliberate. We can look at robotics in the worlds of industry and commerce, administration, and whatever. Robotics come in because they are smarter and cheaper than people for doing a certain class of jobs. And what's been happening more recently is that the robots get smarter and cheaper and displace more and more jobs. And in case you hadn't noticed, just read the newspapers for the next couple of years, and you'll see that it will become increasingly difficult for people who are not smart enough or cheap enough to get a job. And we are facing a crisis of mass structural unemployment whose dimensions are hard to imagine. Now, this is, in fact, a sledgehammer solution to a problem of efficiency and economy in manufacture. Now, this can relate to augmentation in the way in which people who start off with advantages in life through choosing the right parents will, if technology has its way, not merely get a better education and go to elite universities and be better trained to get the jobs that remain, but they'll also be augmented. They'll be smarter, perhaps more stable, quicker, whatever. And so, as we've heard, augmentation in the context of a social crisis produced by sledgehammer solutions of robotics will be all part of the machinery of an unequal and perhaps disastrous society. Now, when we look at those two examples and we say we're not against technology, we rejoice in what technology can do, but if it is applied in an unthinking and essentially gadget-worshipping, inhumane fashion, the consequences can be disastrous. So when we look at a technology, we ask two sorts of questions. The first question is summed up by what is called Murphy's Law. Now, this is a law of technosocial systems which is not widely taught in universities, but in fact, that tells us something about universities. Murphy's Law is whatever can go wrong, will go wrong. And interestingly enough, if you look at the literature on Murphy's Law, there are not lots of research papers, there's actually a collection of jokes. So Murphy's Law is the wisdom of people who actually keep the show on the road. And yet it is not recognized, it is not understood by those who are pushing for progress at all costs. Now, when we have sledgehammer solutions, they tend to be very vulnerable to Murphy's Law because they oversimplify a reality which is always complex. If we are killing bugs, we don't always kill them all. Sometimes we manage to kill them all, like with polio. But usually we don't kill them all, and then we breed up new ones, which are more nasty. We may have solutions, we may have technologies which are unforgiving and in which accidents become catastrophes. Nuclear power is arguably such a technology. I say arguably because there are two sides of that argument. Then, along with Murphy's Law, we have to ask social questions about what is happening when a technology is introduced. Now, the world is unfortunately, up to now, a divided world, divided on grounds of power, influence, privilege, all the rest of it. The technologies come to be in those divided worlds. And one can feel guilty at being a member of the lucky class. Someone once called us part of the golden billion. But there we are, and we have to do our best within that constraint, but we must realize that's where we are. So we look at the technology and say, who pays for introducing it and why? Who gains? Who loses? And finally, when we hear people talking about how we will introduce these wonderful things and we will have these great benefits, the key subversive question, and perhaps it is a neo-Luddite question, is who are the we who is in this wonderful position? And what about they who are not? And they might be the people who are going to be victims of a future epidemics from smart bugs. They might be the people who are losing their jobs because of robotics. They might be the people who never will get a job because of robotics plus augmentation. So let's by all means applaud the technology which enables the human use of human beings, but let's just remember that even in the civil sphere, technology can be profoundly anti-human and inhumane. It's our job to be aware of this and make sure it doesn't happen. So, thank you.
Thank the honourable guest for his speech. I'd now like to open the debate to the floor. If you'd like to speak, if you could raise your hand and come to the front so the mics can pick you up. I look for a speaker in proposition of the motion. Gentleman just there, thank you.
Madam President, the arguments presented are indeed very persuasive. However, I would ask the opposition to consider the fact that in a world of robotics, where there is Moore's law, surely augmentation of the human being is to the advantage of the human race. Thank you.
I'd now like to ask if there's a speaker in opposition of the motion. Yeah, lovely, thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. And I would like to support the opposition. I believe this is a huge ethical question. There are so many great things that we can do with technology, but augmenting humans and creating a wealthy, privileged, elite class of bionic humans is not really the ideal world that I want to live in. And we're getting so close to being at the point of where we have all this great technology that we could solve and feed the world's population. Why are we wasting, God's gift to man, this great technology, on creating privileges, creating inequality that we'll never be able to solve? So I think it's a can of worms that, as we're moving forward, the leaders like Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking are right. We need to make guidelines before we make these things and think about them from the start. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
I'd like to thank thank the floor speakers for their contributions this evening. I'd now like to look to Phil Lyman to close the case for the proposition.
Thank you. It's really a tremendous honor and privilege to be here. This is an experience that I think I'll remember for a very long time. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you, distinguished members of the opposition. You've made a very compelling argument, but it's an argument that I don't think was in opposition to what we were actually saying. In fact, I would like to maybe take a few minutes to talk about a really beautiful and elegant and important, I think quintessentially human piece of technology, the sledgehammer. The sledgehammer. I think the sledgehammer is great. I think sledgehammers, the understanding of the principles involved, the understanding of levers and the concentration of force, have really been one of the main things that makes us truly human, that has actually allowed us to build more or less all great civilizations. The sledgehammer demolished the Berlin Wall, unifying people together. The sledgehammer, more recently, was used to destroy priceless works of art in Syria, but I don't think you would blame the sledgehammer or the inventors of it for that atrocity. I think you would blame the people wielding it. In fact, I think more and more this is the recurring case. Very few times is the root of the technology itself a problem, but quite often the way that it's misused by people or the way that it's used intentionally for people with bad intent leads us to a bad place. The opposition talked very compellingly about Murphy's Law. And in fact, Murphy's Law is a very important principle that I do think is misunderstood, most often by people who quote Murphy's Law. And there's an alternative of Murphy's Law, actually a combination of Murphy's Law, which I would like to propose here. In fact, I would very much like, putting humility aside, for this forever, from here on out, to be known as Libin's Law after me, and I encourage all of you to tweet this immediately. It's the intersection of Murphy's Law and Moore's Law. It says that the number of things that will go wrong will roughly double every year. And it's for this reason that we need technology and that we need augmentation. And let me talk for a second as the CEO of a company that describes what we're doing as building a second brain. That's literally trying to make people smarter using the technology, literally trying to enhance the cognitive abilities of people. Very much, I think, what members of the opposition would have you believe is very scary. Technology is always scary. Rapid progress, rapid change is always scary. In fact, there's a very well understood cognitive bias in people called the negativity bias, which basically says that you look much smarter when you talk about the negative consequences of things than you do if you're just enthusiastic about it. Anytime any large question is debated, anytime there's any kind of transformation or revolution or new technology, it's always much simpler to be saying, yeah, you know what, that can go badly. You know what, these are the risks. You know what, this is how things can go poorly. These are all of the things that we need to consider. People look smarter when they bring up problems, when they talk about the negatives. This is a very important role. Of course we need people to talk about the negatives, but sometimes it feels like discussion of the negative consequences, the possible future negative consequences of technology takes up maybe 98% of the conversation. It's much easier to talk about the negative side effects than it is to talk about the unintended positive side effects. Because talking about the positive transformation of technology requires an active vision, requires an active imagination, requires using a totally different part of your brain than the lizard brain, than the appeal to fear that talking about the downsides. And the downsides that are discussed for most technologies, most of the time, completely come true. All of the downsides are there. Virtually all of the arguments that the opposition has made will come true. But the upsides of making people better, making people smarter, will far, far outweigh the downsides. The downsides will come true, and they're easy to see right now, and they're easy to predict, and it's very important that we work together to minimize these downsides as much as possible. But the upsides are much harder to really see. They're much harder to internalize. They're much harder to embrace because they're not here yet. This fundamental question goes all the way back to all technology. It goes back to the invention of the written language. The written language was originally basically just used as a way to deface perfectly good cave walls, was something that caused a huge amount of stress when it came out. I mean, just imagine the discussion with the experts of the time, sitting around saying, you know, we used to have to remember our tribal history orally, going back many, many generations. But kids today, with their scrawling on the walls, they have it easy. They don't have to remember our history many generations back. This writing, this technology is ruining their brains. It's making people dumber. This will be the end of our caveman civilization. And in fact, all of those things, all of the bad things that are said actually came true. The invention of written language probably has made us dumber in a certain way because parts of the brain that we're not using anymore just stopped being developed. But I think overall, the impact of language has been a net positive for humanity. Going back even further, this was true of fire. I mean, can you imagine a more terrifying technology to early people than fire? The ultimate thing that destroys everything that you can possibly imagine. Fire bad. And yet fire, harnessed correctly after thousands of years of mastery, can be used to make a good curry. I think most of us would say that humanity is better off by having invested in fire, even though it is unimaginable that any technology could possibly be scarier than fire was to the people who first tried to learn how to use it and harvest it, and horror of horrors, bring it inside of the home or the cave, as it were. That's what we're seeing today. We're seeing technology that has every potential to make inequality worse, and that's why we need to join together to use technology to make more equality, to fight against the forces that would create a class of elites and a class of have-nots. The answer to these questions is more technology, more augmentation, more access to communications, making people smarter, not in any way going backwards. I'd like to invite the members of the opposition to join us in working towards this future, working towards the future where the problems that you've identified can be mitigated by judicious, smart use of technology, sledgehammers and all, antibiotics and all, smart targeted antibiotics that will kill only the exact germs that they need to be killed and all, and to do that as much as possible and enthusiastically as possible for a better world for all of us. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank the honourable guest for his speech and now look to Michael Danucci to close the case for the opposition.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank my esteemed team members and the esteemed members of the opposite team. Michael, Ali, Phil, you did an admirable job of a little bit of sleight of hand of trying to take an intellectual magic trick and fool everyone into believing that this proposition is about technology and debating about whether technology is good or bad. But I'm sorry, that's not the debate we're having tonight. The debate that we're having tonight is whether or not augmented humanity is beneficial for the world. So please don't get distracted by any of the intellectual sleight of hand. In fact, as I sat there listening to the fantastically well-reasoned and cogent arguments from all three of my proposition team, the metaphor that came to mind was, it was exactly like the horns of a steer. You've got a sharp point here, maybe a sharp point there, but in between it's mostly all bull. So nobody is saying that a sledgehammer, which is so good at destroying things, so good at destroying the Berlin Wall, so good at bringing down pieces of artwork in Syria, but would you want that piece of technology augmented to your skeleton, to your human frame? I would argue no. I'm thrilled that Michael believes that my rental tuxedo looks so fitted that it's actually something that belongs to me. But I'm sorry, it'll be going back to the shop on Tuesday. I will not be quoting Elon Musk, and I will not be quoting Dr. Hawking, and in fact, I'm still in something of a reverie, dwelling longingly on, what did you call it, the abuse at the hands of a sexualized fembot? So give me a moment of quiet reflection to think about that. Okay, I'm done. I'm sorry, but we're not here tonight to debate the idea of diagnosing illnesses, as Ollie pointed out. We're not talking about the idea of palliative health care for the sick or infirm. We're here to debate human augmentation with technology, not treating, augmenting humanity. We're not pessimistic on the opposition team about the future. We're optimistic about humanity in general. And I am not anti-technology. I'm from Silicon Valley. I've spent 20 years there pushing and putting forth new technologies into the world. I'm extremely pro-technology. So please take whatever preconceived notions you may have walked into this room with about augmented humanity and come dream with me for just a couple of moments. Ollie said he has no idea where this technology will take us. Good news, everybody, I do. So sit back and I'll tell you. Wouldn't it be nice if whenever a new technology is unleashed on the world, it took only the most benevolent and beneficial forms? Wouldn't that be nice? But it never seems to happen that way, does it? It never does. It's going to take many forms, both good and evil, and there's no way to only permit the beneficial and benevolent forms while eradicating the evil. So where do we draw the line? Are we using this technology only to repair nature when it fails, or are we augmenting it in a way that nature never intended and should be impossible? If you're correcting a deficit, that's one thing. And I don't think anyone will take issue with the fact that human augmentation for reparative purposes is a good thing. No one would argue that a mentally handicapped person taking a pill or an injection or having a surgical procedure to get their brain power to a normal level so that they can lead a healthy and productive life, no one will say that that's a bad thing. I won't, Kate won't, Jerry won't. Nor will we say that the replacement of a lost leg in combat with a robotic prosthesis is a bad thing. What we are saying is the fact that what happens when that robotic prosthesis is so good that healthy people with two normal functioning legs decide to replace those limbs with robotic prostheses so that they can run faster or become an Olympian without having put in any of the work to earn it? Or what about taking a normal brain and augmenting it to super intelligent levels? These won't just be entrepreneurs and doctors that do this. This will be terrorists and people who seek to do ill. So imagine what would happen if a member of ISIS gets a hold of this type of technology. Is that beneficial for the world? Physical augmentation, cognitive augmentation are one thing, but you know it's not going to stop with simply making repairs to correct nature's deficits. If you think that these possibilities are far-fetched, just take a look at the cosmetic surgery industry. Is that not human augmentation? What good is that doing the world? Are we prepared to mess about with human beings when we're not even certainly clear on what it is to be human? Evolution is a long, subtle process. It's measured not in years or decades, but millennia and eons. Should we presume to know better than evolution by augmenting our skeletons, our limbs, our eyes, our ears, and our brains? I say nay, 1,000 times nay. The awesome power of technology is that sometimes it sends us hurtling forward into the past. And there we encounter problems that we had completely forgotten about because they've been eradicated. So let me give you an example right here in Oxford, when it was the time it was founded, in 1231 AD. In that time, there were things called sumptuary laws. Do you know about these? Sumptuary laws were laws about what you could wear, what class of people could wear what type of clothes. The rich had access to the technology, the augmentation of the day. Better clothes, better food, access to possible health care and education. As a result, the aristocracy was tall, thin, elegant, and well-spoken. The poor, on the other hand, were short, fat, hunched over, poorly spoken, and ignorant. Why? Because they didn't have access to human augmentation. Do we want to go back there? Do we want to revisit those times? Do we want to launch ourselves forward into another Middle Age? I would argue no. As a result, it was very easy to distinguish between the rich and the poor. And I would put forth 3 terrifying possibilities that could result from human augmentation. The first one is a new techno-elitism, where the rich, as Jerry mentioned, as Kate mentioned, this technology will not be available in a widespread fashion. It will be available only to a select few. They will be able to augment their skeletons, their organs, their eyes, ears, and brains. As a result, we're going to have a wider separation than ever of the haves and have-nots. In fact, you could say that it actually will create 2 separate species. Is that what we want? That's human augmentation. The second possible danger of human augmentation is a vastly lengthened lifespan. Our current lifespan in developed countries is about 80 years. And we have already taxed our natural resources and the Earth's ability to keep up with us to its limit. Imagine what will happen if we augment humanity to the point that a lifespan is doubled. It would become disastrous. The next world war would be fought over things like water or air. And the final scenario that I want you to consider, as I'm asking you to dream with me about augmented reality or augmented humanity, is the idea of uploading one's consciousness to the cloud upon your death. That is augmented humanity. Storing your brain, your consciousness, your memories inside of a computer bank, doesn't that really consist of depositing your soul in some sort of an eternal purgatory here on earth? Isn't that your soul? What is the human essence without a human form? I ask you to consider all of these things because this is human augmentation. I'll leave you with one final thought. Francis Fukuyama is a renowned futurist, and he's a professor at Johns Hopkins University of International Political Economy, and he's a member of President Obama's Bioethics Council. He was asked recently what idea, if embraced, would pose the greatest threat to the welfare of humanity. Without pausing, he said, human augmentation. And then he explained, that movement wants nothing less than to liberate the human race from its biological constraints. This is Dr. Fukuyama's words. Underlying the idea of equality of rights is the belief that we all possess a human essence that dwarfs manifest differences in our skin color, our beauty, even our intelligence. And this essence and the view that individualism has inherent value is at the heart of the human experience. Human augmentation seeks to strip away that essence. Do you want to strip away that essence? I urge you to vote nay tonight. That's a vote to avoid rampant overpopulation and overuse of the Earth's natural resources, To vote nay is to step away from the possibility of a fractured reality that strips us of our human essence. And a nay vote is a vote denouncing the creation of a techno-elite species of aristocratic haves, once again subjugating us unfortunate group of less privileged have-nots by means of a pill or an injection or a surgical procedure that one group can afford and the other cannot. The sumptuary laws of the 1200s have long since been abolished. Let's not go back there, shall we? Look around you and be wary. I urge you to vote nay.
I thank the honourable guest for his speech. I would also like to thank all our speakers this evening. May I remind you that you are voting with your feet. If you'd like to vote with the proposition, then please walk out the side of the door marked aye. If you'd like to vote with the opposition, out of the door marked no. If I could ask everyone to remain seated while our guest speakers leave, but thank you all for coming.